Strange things rarely begin with something dramatic or obviously frightening, and most of the time they start in ordinary places where people feel completely safe, places where routines repeat every day so predictably that nobody expects anything unusual to happen. Hotels are like that, especially the smaller ones where the same staff members work the same shifts every week, and the same types of travelers come and go without anyone thinking much about them. A quiet lobby, the soft sound of luggage wheels across tile floors, the smell of cleaning chemicals drifting down the hallways in the early morning, all of it feels normal and harmless. In places like that, when something strange begins to unfold, people usually assume there must be a simple explanation. Maybe someone made a mistake with a reservation. Maybe a guest is just very private. Maybe housekeeping forgot to log something correctly. For a while, everyone convinces themselves there is nothing worth worrying about. And that is exactly how this situation began at a small hotel, where nothing unusual had ever really happened before. At least not until the staff slowly realized that one particular guest had been inside the same room for far longer than anyone expected. And once people began asking questions about that quiet room at the end of the third-floor hallway, the answers they eventually found made the entire building feel different. At first, it all seemed small and easy to ignore, just another minor detail in a place where hundreds of travelers pass through every month. But as the days stretched into weeks, and nobody ever saw the man who had checked into that room leave even once, the staff started to notice little things that did not sit right with them. Things that suggested someone inside that room had been doing something very deliberate, something careful, something that had been hidden in plain sight while everyone walked past the door without thinking twice about it. Before we start, please subscribe if you haven't already. The hotel itself sat just outside a busy highway town where most guests only stayed a night or two before continuing their trips. And because of that, the staff rarely paid close attention to individual visitors unless someone caused trouble or needed something unusual. The building had 3 floors and long carpeted hallways where the light stayed on all night, and the rooms were simple but comfortable, with identical furniture and soft yellow lamps beside each bed. The front desk was run mostly by a woman named Kavita during the day, and a younger man named Sandy during the night shift, while housekeeping rotated through the floors every morning starting around 9 o'clock. When the man checked in, nothing about him stood out in any memorable way. He arrived in the late afternoon carrying a medium-sized suitcase and wearing dark clothes that looked clean but slightly wrinkled, and he spoke politely to the woman at the desk while filling out the registration form. His name was written as Arvind Mehta, and he paid for 2 nights in advance using cash, which was not unusual for travelers passing through the area. He asked for a room on a higher floor where it would be quiet, and Kavita gave him room 312 at the far end of the third-floor hallway. During the first 2 days, nobody thought about him again, because guests came and went constantly, and housekeeping cleaned the rooms as soon as people checked out. When the second day passed and the room was not vacated, Sandeep noticed the reservation had been extended, and there was an envelope under the front desk computer containing more cash with a short note that simply said another 3 nights please. The handwriting looked calm and careful, each letter shaped neatly, and although it seemed a little unusual that the man had not come down to speak to anyone directly, the hotel allowed extensions like that all the time. The envelope had been slipped under the office door during the night, which meant the guest must have come downstairs at some point when the lobby was empty. Housekeeping attempted to clean the room on the 3rd morning, but the door remained closed and the privacy sign hung from the handle. The woman pushing the cleaning cart knocked lightly and waited, then knocked again, and when nobody answered, she moved on to the next room without much concern. Some travelers simply preferred not to be disturbed. That continued through the following days. And each morning, the same sign remained hanging on the door while a new envelope containing cash appeared at the desk, requesting another extension. It was not until nearly 2 weeks passed that the pattern began to feel strange. The staff started realizing that none of them had actually seen the man since the day he checked in. The security camera in the lobby recorded people walking through the doors constantly, yet there was never any clear footage of him entering or leaving the building. The elevator camera did not capture him either, which meant that if he was still staying in the room, he must have been using the stairwell at unusual hours when the cameras did not show his face clearly. At first they laughed about it casually, saying maybe the man was a writer or someone working online who preferred staying inside all day. But even then, small details started to bother them. The housekeeping staff reported that the room never placed garbage outside the door like many long-term guests did, and there were no food delivery bags left in the hallway either. The man never called the front desk for towels, never asked for extra soap, never requested anything at all. Around the 15th day, the smell appeared. It was faint at first, something sharp and chemical drifting through the third-floor corridor early in the morning. The cleaning staff assumed another employee had used too much disinfectant while wiping the hallway railings, and the smell slowly faded by the afternoon, so nobody investigated further. The next day the smell returned again, stronger this time, and it carried the very distinct scent of bleach. Bleach was used in the hotel laundry room downstairs, but not normally in guest hallways. And when one of the cleaners pushed her cart past room 312, she paused because the odor seemed to be coming directly from behind that door. She knocked gently, waited, then knocked again slightly louder. There was no answer. The privacy sign still hung from the handle. When the woman mentioned it downstairs, Kavita frowned slightly and checked the computer, confirming the room had just been extended again for another 3 nights with another envelope of cash that had appeared overnight. The staff began discussing whether they should call the room phone to check on the guest, but they hesitated because, technically, the man was paying regularly and had not broken any rules. People sometimes stayed quietly for weeks without interacting much. Still, something about the smell unsettled them. The following night, Sandeep worked the desk alone as usual, and sometime after midnight, he stepped outside for a moment to smoke near the parking lot while watching the lobby cameras on the small monitor beside the desk. The building was quiet, and the hallway screens showed empty corridors where the lights hummed softly above the patterned carpet. At one point, he noticed a faint movement on the third-floor camera near the far end of the hallway, close to room 312. The figure that appeared on the screen looked like someone walking slowly past the camera, but the angle was strange and the person's face never turned toward the lens. The shape seemed thin, almost hunched, and the movement lasted only a few seconds before the hallway returned to being empty. Sandeep assumed it was the guest stepping out briefly, maybe heading toward the stairwell. But when he rewound the footage later, he realized something odd. The figure never came from the direction of the room. It appeared already in the hallway, walked past the camera, and then disappeared near the emergency exit door. There was no footage showing anyone leaving room 312. The next morning, the bleach smell was stronger than it had ever been. Housekeeping refused to approach the door again, and the manager was finally called in to check the situation personally. The man knocked several times while announcing himself clearly, explaining that staff needed to enter for routine maintenance if the guest was still inside. There was no response. When they checked the computer system, they realized something else unsettling. The envelopes had stopped arriving. The last extension payment had been made 4 days earlier. The room was now technically overdue. The manager stood in the hallway holding the master key, while the smell of bleach drifted through the carpeted air, and several staff members gathered behind him, watching silently as he knocked one final time before unlocking the door. When the door opened, The first thing everyone noticed was the smell. It was so strong that it almost stung the eyes, filling the entire room with the unmistakable scent of heavy cleaning chemicals. The second thing they noticed was how perfectly arranged everything looked. The bed was made tightly with hospital corners, the suitcase sat closed at the foot of the bed, and all the man's clothes were folded in careful stacks across the desk and chair as if someone had sorted them deliberately. His shoes were aligned neatly beside the wall, and the bathroom sink gleamed with wet surfaces that suggested it had been scrubbed recently. Yet the man himself was nowhere in the room. The bathroom was empty. The closet was empty. The window was locked from the inside. At first, the manager assumed the guest had simply left quietly, but that explanation collapsed almost immediately when they noticed something disturbing about the bathroom floor. The drain had been removed. Inside the pipe, there were faint dark stains that the bleach had not completely erased. Police were called within the hour, and when investigators examined the room more closely, they discovered something that explained why the smell of bleach had been so strong for days. The guest had spent a long time cleaning. Every surface had been washed repeatedly, the carpets had been soaked and scrubbed, and even the underside of the mattress had been wiped carefully. Yet despite all that effort, forensic tests still revealed traces of blood in several places around the bathroom and near the edge of the bed. But none of the blood matched the name written on the registration form. Arvind Mehta did not exist. The identification number on the registration form belonged to someone who had died several years earlier. When police reviewed older missing person cases in nearby towns, they eventually discovered something unsettling that nobody at the hotel could have guessed. Over the past 8 years, several people had disappeared while traveling alone along that highway, and in 3 of those cases, investigators later discovered records showing those missing travelers had briefly stayed at small roadside hotels shortly before vanishing. One of those hotels was the same building, and in each of those old records, the same name appeared on a temporary reservation made during the same week: Arvind Mehta. What investigators eventually concluded was something deeply disturbing. The man had been using small hotels as temporary workspaces, places where he could check in quietly under a false identity, wait for travelers passing through town, and lure them into private meetings under the pretense of business or transportation arrangements. Room 312 had not been the place where his victims died. It had been the place where he cleaned himself afterward. The bleach, the carefully folded clothes, the removed drain cover, all of it suggested someone who understood exactly how to erase evidence. But the most frightening part of the case was the final discovery. 2 days after the room was opened and the investigation began, police reviewed highway security footage from cameras several kilometers away. At around 3:30 in the morning, the cameras recorded a thin man walking calmly along the shoulder of the road, carrying a small bag. The timestamp showed the footage was recorded nearly 5 hours before the hotel staff unlocked the room, which meant the man who had been staying in room 312 had already left long before anyone opened that door. And according to the hotel's cameras, he had never walked out of the building at all.